You're watching The Midlife Shift with Alex Brooks, and this episode will dive into the smart moves you can make in your 50s to live better in another decade or 2 or 3 or 4, depending on how long you're going to live. Hit the bell to like, subscribe and follow for all the juicy conversations to thrive after 50. Welcome to The Midlife Shift, juicy conversations to help you thrive after 50.
Everybody wants to live better, wants to look better, wants to stay younger.
If we are talking about the future, there's nothing better you can do than to make sure that you've got some moolah.
I can't stand the whole, oh no, I've got no regrets.
Yeah.
Really? Have you lived a life?
Join us as we shake things up and talk about the things that matter and maybe a few things that don't.
Your home and where you live could be the secret weapon to plan a great retirement. Today, we have the amazing superannuation guru, Andrew Boll, and national property editor from Domain, Alice Stoltz, here to chat with us. Alice, I want to know, when you retire, and I know you've got a house full of teenagers right now, and you probably don't even imagine that you will, but when you retire, where do you think you'll live? What sort of house will you be in? Because you raised 3 little kids in a Parisian apartment, right?
Yeah,
you've done this full spectrum.
I did. So I sort of feel like I've done everything in the inverse, talking about, often we see retirees moving abroad at the moment.
Yeah.
And I feel like I sort of did all that much earlier on, that the thought of actually travelling as a retiree, I just think I don't have the energy for that. And I've done all that. Do you know what I mean? So when I hear people say that, I'm kind of like, wow. On that note, I just want to get this out there about my sort of disaster. I feel like I need to disclose this to Andrew about my disastrous superannuation. So my husband and I moved to Paris in 2002, 2003. We went for a year or two and gone on a great adventure and sort of forgot to come home. And we're there for about 12 years. Now, my husband is half Swiss, so he has a Swiss passport, so we're employed on local European contracts in both of our jobs. And the French system is delightfully French, and being socialist, the superannuation system there is a pension system that you pay into, and then the government dictates what that is worth on the day you retire based on how many points you have in the system.
Gosh.
Guys, it's like Qantas frequent flyer program. But even more ambiguous.
But they are literally marching in the streets in France over this pension system right now, right?
And they always are. They're just because there is such a sort of sense of entitlement, and I think that's the tension in France. You've got this socialist system that people feel utterly entitled to no matter where they are in the system.
So
all that to say is that my husband and I paid into the French system for that 12-year period, which will look sort of measly in the scheme of our whole life.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, because we weren't expatriated, we missed out on 12 years of paying super in Australia. And for years, my husband, the actuary, would be like, oh, blah, blah. And I'd be like, oh, Adam, who cares? Let's pass another bottle of Beaujolais and let's just keep living this great life and having children here and being in this sort of wonderful country that, rewards people for having children and has beautiful art and food. And then we got back to Australia with 3 children in tow and didn't even have a house at that point. And we realised that we were sort of like the cobbler's children having the worst shoes, in that our super had just taken a massive dent in what should have been really crunchy years of earning.
Yeah.
We hadn't paid into it, and nor been in the property market as well. So all that to say is, I think, the importance of looking ahead and constantly planning, as boring and arduous as it can feel, is not lost on me anymore.
Yeah.
And that's why for most people, the 12% is compulsory. So you don't get a choice to say, no, I'm going to opt out of that.
You don't have to think too hard
exactly.
about it, right?
So this next generation, they're coming through, they'll have it for 40 years and they'll get to the end and go, wow.
Well, we
hope.
That's
well, and except if they went overseas.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I was going to say, but even when we think about these adult gap years, and we know that more people in their 20s and 30s are having sabbaticals.
Yeah,
and it can just all change very quickly. That as I said, you meet someone, fall in love, and you stay in a country, and you don't think you're going to. And
that's exactly right.
Nest egg is no longer.
So that goes to the gender equity things, and so a lot of the gaps are for women. Mm-hmm. So they have a few years off with children, or they work part-time. And so all of the gaps that emerge for women through that. And so there have been different suggestions put out. There's another one by the Coalition recently about equalising superannuation. Look, at the end of the day, we do look at, or superannuation should be looked at the household level.
Yeah, that's right.
And so if one partner, male or female, has taken some time out or substantial time out and has $300,000 and the partner has 1.7, then it doesn't collectively we've got 2.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, like, so you look at it as a household, except, you know.
Except people get divorced.
Well, and when they do, it should be split.
Yeah.
It's
50-50.
That is true. And I am on my second spouse, right?
Yeah.
I know how arduous this is because it took me 8 years to get a divorce precisely because the super splitting was in contention.
Yeah.
And I had to, that was my first brush with an actuary because I had to get an actuary to crunch the value of a defined benefit fund. And then we had to negotiate for 2 years. And then I had to take court action. So I had to spend $20,000 like getting this to court to find, like, it was actually not very easy.
Yeah, I've got a lived experience with a friend, and I don't think they had much super. He ran his own business, and so probably wasn't doing as much. But
that's another big gap in the market is people who run their own business. Some years you can contribute and some years you can't, right? That's the nature of business.
Keeping the business going is the main thing. And when they divorced, did the house and everything else, and I said, now what about the super? And I said, I'm done. I'm done fighting. I'm not going after any of the super. You know, like, so that's
very common. I've seen that. See, unfortunately, I am the world's biggest pain in the ass, and I just
every last bit.
I could not. No, it's my only strength is being a pain in the ass. A lot of people will tell you that.
But it is a challenge with, isn't it? Like, it's something that can feel so abstract as you're living your life mindfully thinking. Yeah. Push hard at work, look after my children, renovate my house. This abstract notion of
one day,
how much will I need per year, and is it $100,000? Is it whatever it might be? But that it feels so abstract, I think, for so many people.
Yes.
So I helped her get some financial advice and reviewed it, but the big thing that we decided, getting back onto the housing topic, So one of the things that said the biggest thing that you can do is if you've got from the settlement, this much money, you're not renting. And living off that, you are buying a house, having a mortgage. That'll be exempt from the means test. You'll get the full age pension.
Correct.
And so you will live a much better life if you own a property rather than renting. If you can do that, find a way.
And I think that's the point, because I think even though we've talked about some people are enjoying the freedom of renting as they get older, which I can completely understand.
And living in a better location.
Yeah.
There's now build-to-rent developments that are actually pretty nice.
But I think
they're for the upper end of the market, though.
They are.
Not deny it.
And I think that's a very different model. But I think if people, as of today, go out rent, you look at what vacancy rates are around the country, and they are on the floor.
Correct.
And I think that emotional instability and psychological instability that can be you're left with during a point of time in your life where you might have health challenges. You know, I just think that idea of bricks and mortar is actually quite appealing to a lot of people for that very reason. Like
so there was one story that came through talking with people in the industry about annuities, and one of the classic parts of that story is like, we have maybe put enough aside so that the annuity will give you guaranteed income to cover your needs.
Before you get into annuities, can you explain what they are? Because an annuity versus a pension is sort of the way most normal people would think of it, right? You can turn a lump sum into a pension, but an annuity or a fixed income stream is slightly different. Can you just explain that nuance first?
Well, for all intents and purposes, so there's the age pension.
Yep.
The government pays that, and that's a regular income stream. $30,000 a year or so.
Yep.
So an annuity, and there's different types, and we can go through some of those. But at the end of the day, they will pay an income stream like a pension, and it will be paid until you die.
That's right.
Now, depending on the type of annuity, the income amount can be guaranteed, or it could fluctuate with investment returns. But at the end of the day, it will continue to be paid no matter how long you live. So sometimes they're used as part of
it hedges the risk of longevity.
It hedges the longevity risk. It does. It takes that out of the equation, at least for your financial needs.
Yep.
And if you've want to spend more than that and you can afford to, then you can invest that money some other way to pay for your wants.
Okay.
So quite often the needs are covered by the annuity and the wants are covered by an account-based pension.
And that could be a good way for everyday people to think about it,
Absolutely.
Right? Because all of us want to have the basics covered, and that's the bit that's so abstract. We can't work out how, if we live on, a combined household income of, $200,000 a year today, and we're paying a mortgage and we've got teenagers at home, we can't imagine that time when there's no kids at home and when, I don't know, you may choose to live in the same house or not, but you can't compute how it will work.
So there's one situation that came up as a story in a conversation like this, and the lady, I think she'd widowed or might have been divorced, but she said, I want to buy an annuity to cover my mortgage repayments in retirement.
Ah.
So then I know I'll never be kicked out of my home.
Mm.
That was the only thing she wanted to be certain of. The rest, I can manage the risks around everything else.
Wow.
I just don't want to ever be
want my house.
homeless.
I love that clarity that she could just actually drill it down to that.
One thing.
Because you can sort of imagine, can't you, that it's like, if nothing else, surely the neighbour next door, there's always Meals on Wheels or someone will help me if I'd needed it, except just providing that roof over her head was kind of it.
So that's, so that you said the word security, and that, like people want to be able to say, I go to bed at night and I know that I'm in my safe haven and I'll never lose this no matter what.
Yeah. And because we know that more people will be heading into retirement with mortgages, I mean, Alice, house prices, how much have they gone up since you've been a property editor?
It's revolting. I mean, it's just, it's revolting looking at that growth when you think about younger generations into the market. If you're an owner,
it's great.
I
think it's fantastic.
I think that's the uncomfortable truth about the affordability issue in this country at the moment, is that for a lot of people, this is the golden time of like people rubbing their hands together, and they're doing it quite discreetly because they've made so much money out of property, right? And at the same time, they sort of, those people probably think, well, my kids will be okay because I'll end up giving them that money down the track, and it's got this sort of Jane Austen scenario of intergenerational wealth.
It's very Jane Austen,
right? Like, and if you don't have that, that's the challenge, and I think, that's the tension that we're all in at the moment.
So the classic situation for property, and like you think about like other investments, is that you really should be getting a 3% yield from a property investment and 3.5% capital growth.
Mm-hmm.
That's a 6.5% return, which is consistent with what you might expect to get, a bit less than from a stock in the stock market.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
But in the last 20 years,
it's been
25
way
years,
higher.
you've actually got a 6.5% capital return.
Yeah, that's right.
On top of the yield. And so with wages growing at 3.5%, capital growing at 6.5%, now I wonder if this is the gap between wages.
Yeah.
And this was why the French became socialists, because capitalism was evil.
They all took to the streets for this very reason, right?
Well, we've gone through this period, and so there's, we've had zoning issues and the ability to get property developed quickly. And then interest rates have dropped from all-time highs of like 18, 19% in the early 90s to 0% in COVID. And so when interest rates drop, what happens to prices?
Yeah, exactly. They just go Burko.
And we're seeing that play out right now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The market's often racing again because we've also had this pent-up demand.
As we know, though, the property market doesn't behave homogeneously. It's not like a share market, right? Like it's very different from suburb to suburb, even within the suburb. And, just this week we had all that climate data come out showing, whole swaths of Australia will likely be potentially unlivable. And it's not that far away. I mean, it certainly is long term. It's not going to happen tomorrow. When will this madness kind of change?
I think there needs to be sort of a shift psychologically, Alex, because I still think people will still buy in high-risk areas, even aware of the risks of climate change.
Whether it's bushfire or flood or whatever it might be.
And we've seen that play out in the past year or so, particularly in New South Wales and in Queensland.
Byron Bay, still one of the most expensive areas in Australia.
And you see these prices go like that. And people, I think maybe it's part of our sort of Australian way of life that we just sort of think, oh, well,
she'll be
right. And I don't know that people have that much reliance on the government per se, but I just think that it's the conundrum for people is also, well, what else can I afford? And we also have this sort of idealistic approach to where we live, that we don't often want to live far from where we've grown up or where we've sort of hung our hat for a number of years. So we get quite emotional about it. And I think that people are like, oh, well, I'll pay the price of living in a higher risk area if it means I can be near my sisters and my best friends and yada, yada, yada. And there is a high price to pay, and sometimes the most extreme sense, life or death.
Well, that's frightening, isn't it?
So we have made some adjustments. So if you're now wanting to build in a forest, then you've got it. The building codes require fireproofing and all sorts of other things, and
it'll cost you 4 times as much to build.
Absolutely.
And the real issue, though, is the insurance of your house. So as an actuary, there's already big swaths of Australia that are pretty much uninsurable. When I was editing Choice, up in the tropics, some people were paying $40,000 a year to try and insure their house. Now, that's only going to get higher, right?
Yeah. Or some people live without insurance.
Yeah.
Some people just
Many
say
now live without
oh,
insurance
well,
because
it's
of this.
not worth it.
Yeah.
So the flood-prone areas, we haven't changed the building codes for floods, by the way. We have for fire, but not for flood.
But not for floods.
And so how do we mitigate flood risks? And so the Northern Rivers region in New South Wales, there's people probably should be relocated to other areas and given incentives to do
Buybacks.
so. And the buybacks. So who pays for the mitigation? But insurance premiums are $30,000 a year. Well, that's unaffordable.
Mm.
So if something happens, I just hope the government bails me out. Like that's essentially what will happen.
People are saying.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the government and the taxpayer becomes the insurer of last resort.
But
which
will
means
they?
why the government, well.
Will they?
That's
Is
the
kind of
question.
the question.
So this goes to where the actuarial side comes in. So what is the cost of making good later on versus what's the cost of mitigating up front? So if we had to...
Can you crunch that model for us? I'll give you 5
Somebody
seconds.
can. There's an actuary out there who does this. It's in the general insurance area, they do this all the time, and the reinsurers will have this. And so all the data is available to say, well, this is what the costs will look like. If we instead of spending $200 billion after it happens, why don't we spend $30 billion building a wall to stop it happening?
Yeah, correct.
Or stopping the impacts of it happening.
And I think also when you think about governments and their intervention in that, it's also, and I'm going down a bit of a different path here, but this idea also of, or what a government's doing to really genuinely trying to move the needle on making home ownership more obtainable for younger people.
Yeah.
Because if they're not, that becomes a problem that just gets kicked down the road that we're experiencing now, right?
It's all,
and I know the government would argue, well, we're offering this and that, but we know what all that does, just stimulates the market.
Totally.
Why aren't we looking at things like, dissolving stamp duty or replacing it with a longer-term land tax? I mean, there are other things that one can do.
Other levers.
Encouraging downsizing more profoundly than what's happening now.
So the downsizing conversation is really interesting because the research I read yesterday, which I sent to Andrew, said something like 80% of people do not plan to downsize in retirement. They absolutely plan to live in their own house, forever and ever, amen. As Rachel Lane and Stephen Huppert sort of said, everyone has this sort of delusion that you retire, you live in your house, and then one day you just die in your sleep. Yeah.
Did it talk about the reason why, Alex?
No, it just talks about intentions, right? And that's this mental model problem we've got around abstract stuff for the future that we haven't come to terms with is very hard for us to deal with as a risk, right? As human beings, it's hard for us to think about it.
And I think often the main reason why is financial.
Yeah,
it costs too much to move.
Yeah,
and second of all, what I want to move to does not exist. So people want to move to, a lower maintenance style apartment or townhouse or something with an oversized courtyard, a place for their grandkids to stay, et cetera, et cetera. We can talk more about that if we need to. But my point is, and they also want it in the area that they are now often
with. Yeah.
And therein lies the problem. So we look at what is happening in Victoria and New South Wales in particular. All this massive supply is going to hit the market.
Yeah.
That'll be a nice problem to have. It will eventually hit the market.
Yes.
But is it the right type of supply that people want to live in?
Yeah.
And what do you mean by that? Like you're talking about the high-rise apartments versus
and is it a 2-bedroom apartment with a courtyard or is it big enough?
And I think a lot of people, particularly downsizers, are sort of concerned about the idea of sort of body corporate and like these things spook people,
reason.
right? And I think if there's
been strata disasters in Australia.
There are other options. There are other ways of living. And I think in my ideal world, there is a mix of everything.
Yeah.
But
what do you want to live in? What are you and your actuary husband, thinking about?
I actually think there's a gap in the market. And if I ever win the lotto, I'll call you two and we'll sort of hash this out. But I don't know why there's not more more buildings or sort of communities done in a beautiful way that aren't basic and meat and 3 veg style and make you feel depressed and not want to live.
Yeah.
But more that sort of like that Nightingale model, which is that sort of really instilling this sort of sense of community in a building, beautifully, thoughtfully designed, sustainably designed.
Yeah.
And areas that you can dip in and out. Like you look at buildings that were built in the 1920s. We've got beautiful buildings in South Yarra, for example, and they were designed without elevators at the time, but these sort of generous stairwells to encourage conversations between neighbours.
Yeah.
And I look at how we lived in Paris and we had all these old people in our building, and every day they'd walk up and down in the boulangerie. If they couldn't move, they'd just come to us next door and say, I'm not feeling well, can you please go and get my baguette? And this sort of touch point that you have with people all the time, I think is absolutely crucial. So I love the idea of actually community living.
Beautiful apartment.
If I can live in the right sort of building and I don't have to smell your chicken teriyaki cooking, Alex.
And what's with the cauliflower smell in apartment foyers?
You know what it is? It's bad design.
Yeah,
it's not getting engineering right when they're constructing a building because they want to keep the cost down.
So because of Paris, you mentioned a couple of times now.
Yeah.
7 stories.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Height limits.
That's it.
I like living in a 35-story apartment doesn't turn me on at all.
No.
But a 5 or 6 story.
You're okay with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
And with large windows and balconies
Light
and
a view. That's one thing about living in a family home.
Yeah.
Is that you got a back fence.
Yep. And it's your nest.
Because we have downsized into an apartment.
Oh, you have?
And we now have a view looking out over the leafy suburbs of Melbourne, and you wake up in the morning, rather than seeing your back fence, I'm now seeing the Dandenongs and a view, and you go, how good's this?
Nice.
Whilst you're in an apartment, it still feels open and spacious.
Yeah.
Because of the view.
But those apartments, they are expensive. It's not a cheap option. And I think you're exactly right, Alice, is that most people are like, well, I'll pass some of my wealth to my kids so my kids will be okay. But none of us are thinking collectively about everybody's kids being okay, because someone's going to have to pay to wipe our bums if we do end up in residential aged care, right? And we need those young people to feel housed and safe and willing to do those jobs. But no one really thinks of that. Maybe we need to be more like Parisians and get our fluoro vests and march on the streets. And start doing some more. You do that a lot more in Melbourne than we do in Sydney. You love a bit of a street march in Melbourne.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
In Sydney, they're too busy, I don't know, drinking margaritas, looking at the
harbour.
There's
a few people on the bridge the other week, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's true. Which was
Sydney is geographically so much better for a protest, isn't it? Though
because we can lock off the whole bridge.
You can lock it off. You know what I mean? Whereas Melbourne at the moment, look at the poor CBD of Melbourne. I mean, that's the other thing.
There's nothing better though for an international news broadcast. And so there was a protest in Sydney on the Harbour Bridge. Check this out.
True.
Because you can get the shot, and it's now that we live in this age of so much misinformation. There's so much information coming at you. Yep. One clear story is so much more powerful than it used to be.
Yep.
And I think that's why that Sydney protest happened. I mean, the Premier did his very best to stop it. Yep. But it worked, right?
Yep.
Whereas Melbourne, you have protests nearly every
weekend. And most businesses in the city are on their knees.
Oh, God.
Like, they are just... The stories coming out of it are absolutely horrendous. Like, restaurants,
of course,
retail has just been decimated.
Wow.
So, yeah, I mean, it's
is that because politicians aren't doing their jobs and listening? Like, sort of holding people to account. It's an interesting...
Yeah, I feel like it's sort of the canary in the coal mine. I mean, I don't want to get into Melbourne too much, but it is this issue, I think, in Melbourne that the city has been neglected. It still didn't really come back after COVID, and now it's had this whack to it. I mean, I think it's horrendous. I think that there needs to be again, like not propping up the economy is detrimental to all everybody.
Everybody. And going back to that, when you're imagining your super and your retirement, you don't know what sort of economy it's going to be. You have no idea what the markets are going to do, and you equally have no idea what your health or longevity is going to do. All of us are very statistically likely to live a hell of a lot longer than we used to. I have the statistics. It's something ridiculous. So average lifespan might be in your 80s, right? But that actually means nothing, because Australian life tables, invented by an actuary, are these things that sort of give you the likelihood of how long you're going to live. And the older you get, the more likely it is you're going to live even longer, is statistically how it works.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us about that?
Well... I think there's also going to be a two ends of a spectrum talking about here as well, because averages is one thing, but that's misleading.
Yes.
So
fallacy of averages.
It is. So look, and it's one thing. It's another unfortunate outcome from the wealth effect that we've been talking about. Is that a few years ago I looked at some studies, probably 20 years ago, I looked at a study in the UK because they had a lot more pensioner data than we had in Australia, and that the wealthiest 20% lived about 3 years longer than everybody else.
Oh, that's a bit depressing.
Well, it gets worse, because that was 20, 30 years ago, but now that has grown. And so in Australia, we've now got data coming out ourselves. And so the wealthiest 20% are living a lot longer, and the poorest 20%, there might be a gap of 5 or 6 years difference between the wealthiest and the poorest 20% of our community. Now, the poorest 20% will largely live off the age pension, as I said earlier. So they're taken care of. The wealthiest 20%, whilst you say the average might be age 85 and 25% of you might get through to age 90 or 92, the wealthiest will live another 5 or 6 years on top of that.
Wow.
Well,
So they got to make their money last to 98.
even longer.
Yeah.
Well, there's a new Mercer retirement calculator, and it actually calculates to 102. But,
Wow.
I've got the numbers now in front of me. So a woman at age 65 has a 50% chance of living to 91. So that's way beyond the 80s. She has another 25% chance of living to 96 and a 10% chance of living to 99.
Wow.
And if she's wealthy,
It'll
add a
be
few more
longer.
years.
It could
Add
be
a few more years
110.
on.
Yeah, it could be 110. They say that we're going to see someone.
and this
live
is
to
all because of the
110
way
this
they
decade.
eat and see
Look
a
after
doctor and look
themselves.
after themselves. They can afford to look after themselves and they
And
live
get a knee
longer.
replacement when their knee's dicky. And like you can see it now. Like there's, wealthy women in their 50s still look like they're in their 30s because they can get the, they can pay their $400 a month for their weight loss jabs so they can avoid middle-age spread. And you can see that, women who don't live in as wealthy areas actually look their age, and you can see the marked difference. And so for men, those stats, a man at 65 has a 50% chance of living to 89, which is still a lot higher than most men would imagine, and a 10% chance of living to 98. So this whole idea of our longevity is actually something to think about, because what we talked about with the Rachel Lane and Stephen Huppert podcast is that you need to start thinking, so we go up the hill as we accumulate for super and buying a house, right? Generally speaking. We're all very good at that in Australia because we've got enforced savings with super and we're property obsessed. So many of us try to buy a house, even though it's not as big a house as we might have been able to buy 30 years ago. So we're very good at getting up the hill, but coming down the hill, it's too abstract. We don't understand it. We don't engage with it. And we talked about, I thought there were only 2 phases, which was like the go-go years where, you might get your caravan and go touring around Australia, and then the sort of go-slow years, because the ASFA figures break your suggested spending into those 2 things. You will spend less in the go-slow years once you're about 82 because, your knees really do hurt then. And, you've got a few more issues and you don't really want to go as fast as you did when you were in your 60s. But then Rachel Lane brightly pointed out to me with a smile on her face that there's also the no-go years, which no one wants to talk about. Dementia is the leading cause of death of women already in this country. None of us want to think about that. It's frightening to think about it. Now, who is going to look after you if you have dementia? How are you going to pay for that care? So that the no-go years, so you've got go-go years, go-slow years, and no-go years to think about. And how does your money pan out over those? That's sort of interesting because if you're in the no-go years, I mean, Denise Drysdale said she just wants access to a Dunlop pillow and for someone to put it over her head. She wants to be able to determine the no-go time herself. And I would argue a lot of people sort of want to do that. And we have voluntary assisted dying laws, but not really for dementia because you have to be of sound mind. How do you fund this? Come on, actuary.
How do you fund this? So the cost of aged care is going to more than double over the next 50 years.
Wow.
Because we're going to have more older people, bottom line.
Are we going to have anyone working in aged care to do it? That's the real question, right?
And after it doubles, Andrew, does it go down again? Like, is that sort of the
Have you modelled
boomer
this?
explosion? And then...
Well, no, I don't think it does because
it stays high, basically.
It does because basically we've had the wave of the baby boomers come after the Second World War.
Yeah.
And those whilst birth rates have declined since then, the size of the following generations, the millennials and so forth, they're a similar sized generation to the baby boomers because they've had 4 kids. They all each had 3. They all had 2.
Yeah.
But there's a big wave of people still coming through, plus with migration on top of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so with all that balancing it out, it might drop.
You better
off
get
a
used to
little
it,
bit.
basically, though.
But it's a high cost.
The market will adjust.
And I've got to deal with this because my dad, I've got 2 problems.
Yeah.
One is longevity, the other is dementia. My dad died with Alzheimer's at 94.
I'm so sorry.
And his mother died of Alzheimer's when she was 94. So they both
Mm.
lived in their mid-90s, but with Alzheimer's for the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
But so look, how they were both in aged care facilities
It's still very
For a number of
hard.
years.
for a number of years.
It's very hard.
And
It
not
is
to be
hard.
indiscreet, but how does that work financially then? Like in that instance, was that
Well,
or for the average person?
Yeah, this is the great thing about aged care, is that I said this at a meeting with some clients earlier this week at a strategy date. People think about aged care twice in their life.
Yep.
Putting their parents in
Correct.
and going in themselves.
Yep.
And they start thinking about it 2 weeks before they do it.
Well, it's usually in a hospital car park, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's
oh shit! I missed that window of this happening, and now I'm here.
Yeah.
You do not plan for it.
That's
in
correct.
4 years' time, I think I might go into aged
yeah.
Let's do some investigation and find out what
Start
that
some
means.
research.
Talking about
Have a
abstract
bit.
models, yeah. No one
No,
thinks about
it
going
is a
into
last
aged care.
resort.
Yeah, that's right.
Mm.
And
And an emergency
it's an
usually
emergency situation. And
But can be really costly.
can be.
and it's you got to make decisions.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
do I fund it using equity from the house and have a RAD
Yeah,
or do
which
I-
is a residential accommodation deposit.
or do I just pay it out of the income from the age pension or whatever else? The RAD is actually probably the more expensive way to do it, but it's the simplest because most people say I'll just use the equity. at
Yeah,
home
I'll
and
just take
it's
my
done.
home, transfer it into my
Yeah.
aged care costs. Yeah.
But overall, it's probably more efficient
I
to just
love
pay
actuaries,
the
yeah.
income as you go.
And side
if
note,
you can afford it.
Side note, your 4 kids are getting a little bit less in their inheritance when you're doing that also, though.
And your kids
You know what I mean? So it's
are likely making the decisions. That's what's so frightening about
that is a
it.
conflict of interest.
Yeah, so this is what we talked earlier about the health and aged care
Correct.
conversation is another one down the track, is that the cheaper model for most situations is to have in-home care for
That's
as long
right.
as you can, because hospitalisation and residential aged care are expensive models.
They are expensive
so
models.
if you can afford to have carers come in to do things for you
at home.
at home, it
It's
is generally
much better.
cheaper.
But so hard. And given that your kids are likely the people making the decisions about your care, and if they haven't got a house, they're going to make decisions that are different to
Mhm.
kids who are financially secure and actually love you for you. And, I've got kids. They don't always love me for me. Back to
Mm.
that pain in the ass thing. They don't, and you couldn't blame them really. If you live in a dog-eat-dog world, you'll make dog-eat-dog decisions,
Mm.
right? And I think what we talked about in some of our previous podcasts is that if you sort of move into this community living type of model and you're living with other people making these types of decisions, the model's not so abstract and you can actually plan for it a little bit better if you see it around you. But the way we do it now is that we just deny it even exists.
Oh, and we also, I think, miss the window of when it's possible and plausible. So I think, Andrew, you'll have to fill in stats if you know any, but I don't, like the window when you're thinking even about downsizing, there's a time in your life when you're sort of fit for it, ready to go,
Yes.
primed.
And that's still in your go-go years. So
That's
that's
what
the
I mean.
issue.
And
Is
I
you
think-
don't know the go-go to no-go time frame for you.
That's right. And then I think, if you get to that sort of second or third wave that you're talking about, Alex, your capacity, your mental clarity and all that, it's all too hard.
And-
I mean, like even buying a house is just hard anyway, right? Let alone
Yeah,
if
doing it
you've
when
got
you're compromised.
dementia or you've been recently widowed or, you've
Oh,
had huge
yeah.
change in your life or
Yeah.
developers are knocking on your door saying,
Oh,
we're
I'll
gonna
offer you
build it.
$3 million.
that's what, bundle up with your neighbours. Like there's the complexity of it is quite revolting, isn't it?
So I was really lucky that Dad found the garden too hard.
Mm.
And
That
said,
was lucky.
I've had enough.
That was lucky.
And so it's time for us to downsize.
Yeah.
So they made the call. And once Mum and Dad made the call, well, they found a residential community.
Yes.
Yep. An over 55s type
Yeah,
place.
and
Is
they
that
were in
what
there
you mean?
within 2 months.
Wow, that's
They've
really
sold the
quick.
house, done this, we're in, and
Yes.
we're off. Yep, great.
Wow.
And so they had this house they owned in the residential community, not far from where they live, because
Yep.
that's another issue about
Yeah.
Location.
about
Yes.
location and having
Very
a community that you're familiar with and
Well, and
people
your
around
doctors and your shops and
your whole
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so they moved in and they had a bowling green and a
Yeah.
restaurant, mate. So on Friday nights, they could go there and have a drink with other people in the community. And so there
Yeah.
was life happening
Mhm.
there. And there was people in there who were 59 and people in there who were
99.
71. And, so,
Mm.
and then up the back,
Was the more high dependency
Was the
type
aged
care.
care.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
and
My
Mum-
grandparents
Mum's
were in
still
one
in
of those.
there. But they basically moved from here up to there.
Yeah.
And so when Dad went in, but Mum didn't have to, she could only short walk.
Exactly. So she could
when
have
you're a
her
couple-
meals with them. And this is the other conundrum. If you are in a couple, it's much cheaper to retire. It's more efficient. It's the single, and they're usually women, single women actually bear the highest costs of retirement. But when you're planning this aged care transition, it's not so easy when one partner needs the care and the other one doesn't qualify, because how do you make that decision? And do you want to factor that into your retirement planning? Because again, that's not something in our abstract models that we're thinking about. If you have to nurse your partner through, dementia is a very long journey of care. And it can be supported. There's a really good website called Violet, and I urge you to tune into a podcast we're doing very soon about aged care. But how do you think about when your partnership might change?
And I think that's why, for me, the concept of in-house care is kind of, the most
ideal.
Yeah, because you're in your own environment, whatever that is, and hopefully you have downsized, and you do it on your own terms in your own space, so that one person provides the care, gets the care that they need, and the other person, is in their own cocoon, I guess.
But subject to this, your houses, if you have someone come into care, you need a very large bathroom with a very wide door, no bathtubs, no one's getting you in and out of a bathtub.
And heaven forbid stairs. Heaven forbid a veranda. Period home, right? We all, and the more sort of design-centric we all become, the more kind of complex we become in our architecture, right? And I think that's a really valid point.
So accessibility and universal design are features that aren't widely prized, especially in real estate photos. And they really should be, right? Because a hallway that's just that little bit wider could accommodate someone living at home for another 5 to 10 years versus having to go into a residential aged care
And
situation.
therein lies the problem, I think, with a lot of sort of more cookie-cutter style apartments in particular. That the hallways
they're not applying those universal design principles.
So I think that's when we need to be more thoughtful about what we're designing in that space and ensure it's meeting the needs of the community.
So you've talked about the availability of suitable homes. So the people who are going to die in their 5-bedroom home alone.
That's where most of them will.
So how do we free up those? Because you've got a 2-year-old child.
Yeah.
That needs a bath.
Yeah, totally.
But I'm living in an apartment without a bath. And then there's this person over there who's 83 years old living in a 5-bedroom home with a bath.
Yeah.
So I do know.
And 3 bedrooms upstairs, which they can't get to.
I do know of families that have literally swapped, where they've literally gone, we'll flip it. And there's another family I know where the daughter is disabled and she's got 2 kids, and the parents willingly built their own granny flat so they could be close by to help, and so on and so forth. So there is a lot of that self-insurance. That's what an actuary would call that, right?
And I think that's why there's that appeal. Like we saw it rise through divorce of people sort of nesting, keeping the one family home.
I know.
And then, the kids stay there when the partners come in and out of that house, right?
That's right.
And I like that idea a lot, except I worry about sort of the emotional instability of not having your own place, like for the adults involved. It's good for the kids, I acknowledge. And then we think also about this multi-generational living, and I think we are seeing different iterations of it with granny flats. Yeah. We're also seeing it with sort of downsizes, like, the kids and their kids have that part of the house. I'll move here, and the teenagers move there, and they're all sort of flipping and flopping a lot. And there are some incredible examples, actually, of architects who have done this through, it looks sort of like something out of Harry Potter, like amazing sliding walls and windows, and through clever design you can actually do it.
Yeah.
It's the cost involved.
That's right.
And the ability, I think, for people to think outside the box, I guess, with it. But there are options, but they're often at the moment very expensive.
And so what sort of housing, in an ideal world, would we have available in our capital cities? Let's just fantasize. We've talked about some of it. What sort of housing would be better for a population that's getting older and that needs more young people to be able to afford to buy into the market?
Yeah, I think more lower density and definitely courtyards and balconies. I love the idea of communal laundries. People will disagree with me, but I love that idea of almost, again, going back another century of people coming together at the bathhouse. Like Nightingale even has a bathhouse in their building.
Yeah.
And I love that idea, though.
Did you have communal laundries in Paris?
No, but we had this wash machine under the sink.
Oh, like Britain.
Yeah.
I've lived in buildings with communal laundries.
And so have I.
Oh my
and when in my 20s, it was awful, right? Awful.
Who gets so angry?
But again, I think if you're with like-minded people, though, this is what it goes back to. So if you're anally retentive like me about your laundry, and I'm like, Alex, I trust you. It's raining today. Can you grab my sheets when it starts raining?
True.
Because we're friends. We've got a community in that arrangement.
I understand
right?
you have your pegs in a certain way.
I do, and please don't. So again, it's like-mindedness, right? I think sort of not having lots of stairs, and I think is an incredibly important part, because I think that also is challenging for young families, the stair factor.
It is when you got a pram, right?
You know what I mean? That's another part of it.
So you talked about how horrible it was when you're younger.
Yep.
But we were looking then for speed and convenience.
Yep.
So I've got so many other things to get done today, and now I've got to go down there and it's busy and I have to wait. But when you're 70 and you're looking for company and you're all the time in the world, what's wrong with going downstairs to do the washing and waiting and having a chat to someone for a few hours and maybe put a bar in next to it and have a drink with them?
But it would be even better if all those people would do all the busy people's laundry. Oh, my God, how good would that be?
Well, there's another model.
That's hybrid living.
That's another model, though, as well, is that how you bring a community, if you're going to have high level, that, like in our apartment, which we downsized to, there's I don't know, she's probably in primary school, 7 or 8 years old, little girl. Cute. She says hello and she chats.
Yeah, they're so cute.
So it is having multi-generational people living together. There's a lot to be said for that.
There is.
And I think communal dining spaces, like I love this idea. And, a lot of the newer developments now will have apps where you can book it all out. So if you only want your people with you, you can do that. You can do that. But I sort of love that idea of, and also communal gardens and rooftop spaces. I'm a massive fan of that.
What about communal chickens? Because
we haven't actually seen that as a unique selling point in a house, Alex, but it could be coming. Harry and Meghan could be onto something, right, with their chicken coop.
Yeah. Chickens are big, right?
Yeah. But you do think of like neighbourhood gardens and stuff like that. And I do love that idea of people coming together more than going away. And I think that is part of the answer.
So one thing that stops all of this happening, there's many, but it's the frictional costs. You talked before about stamp duty and other things and the like. So each time, and I don't know how people did it, that each time you move, you're paying back in the day 7 or 8%, but now it might be 5 or 6% stamp duty.
But it's hundreds of thousands of dollars.
And you do that every 7 years. No, I mean, we lived in our family home for 27 years because I wasn't paying that for anybody.
Of course, you're an actuary.
But if you weren't paying it though, Andrew, do you think you would have moved earlier? If I said there's no cost in moving other than the removalist truck
and the hassle.
Probably not, because we had a great community. We had drinks on Friday night with the neighbours across the road. The four houses all had kids the same age.
Yep.
And dare I say it, the mums got together at 5 o'clock on a Friday and they all had
bit of wine.
Someone made dinner for all the kids.
Yeah,
which so lovely.
So someone did kids for 9 kids. And they had a drink, had a chat.
Yeah.
So it was a community. And so we would never have moved away from that until we had to. But that's, frictional costs are a huge problem.
I asked because I would move now. Like my children are 20, 18, 16, and I would move now. We would move now if we weren't paying stamp duty.
Yeah.
Because I'm sort of just,
and also
I'm
your
sort of a
house
bit bored,
is big.
and it's a bigger house, and I'm like, you know what I mean? Like, and I love it. It's not that, but I'm ready for. I also love sort of moving.
Yeah,
but why would you want to flush $50,000, $70,000, $100,000 down the toilet?
It will be hundreds.
Well, and also, and what I want to buy, I become like this what we call sideways movers. Like people upsizing, downsizing, like just moving sideways, and then some.
Yeah, exactly. Now, before we've got to wrap up soon, but I wanted to say, Andrew, age pension is something we talked about last time. You believe that's one of the biggest misconceptions and misunderstandings in retirement planning. This is what you told me last time we chatted. Can you tell me why you believe that? The age pension, the government age pension is what I'm talking about.
Well, so there's thresholds to become eligible for it. And I think there's a wild held belief that we shouldn't, we should be self-supporting ourselves and not falling onto the age pension.
Yeah, a lot of people are like, I don't want to be a bludger on the government.
Exactly right. But then again, it's there. We've funded it.
For a reason.
The cost of the age pension to the Australian taxpayer is currently 2.3% of GDP, and because of superannuation and other savings increasing, will fall to 2% of GDP over the next 30 years. Whereas overseas, the cost of their age pension is going up to 8, 9, 10%. So it's affordable for the government and the taxpayers to have it. What we see is a lot of people who are eligible for it don't apply for it straight away.
That's right. You've got to apply just before your birthday at 67 if you're eligible.
Start thinking about it 6 months before.
Yeah.
And so that, because you've got all the information you've got to provide, and people find that a hassle. You've got to provide all your assets and get it
It's always a
valued.
hassle.
But it's worth it. It's $30,000 a year.
It sounds a bit like going to public school when your kids are young.
Yeah.
And you've got this great primary school across
Just
the road
down
from
the
where you
road.
live. It costs nothing.
But you don't choose
And parents like, oh, should I or shouldn't I? Almost. Do you know what I mean? And your point is you're entitled to it.
Yeah.
We've paid taxes. You do you know what I mean?
And the French march in the street to get theirs.
But what people also will misunderstand is that
Most of us are going to rely on it.
Well, when you start
Most
off
of us.
retirement and you have $1 million in super, good luck. That's fine. You're not eligible for the age pension.
That's right. But you'll spend it
But as
down.
you spend it down, in 4 years' time, you've now got $30,000. You're now eligible for some age pension.
That's right.
And so most Australians, probably 80% of Australians, will end up at some point in their retirement being eligible for at least a part age pension.
That's right.
And-
80% of us currently
Wow.
are. It's very high.
But you have to open that gate before you turn
And no one
67.
understands it.
See, and it doesn't get backdated.
That's right.
So
you've got to
So,
understand.
so there's no harm in
It's-
just signing up and saying, here I am,
Yep.
here's my paperwork.
Yep.
That's the paperwork
You're not
that's worth
eligible
doing.
today, but you've got the paper
But
it
and you
reads.
never know, obviously, what could happen.
And this is like the aged care assessment stuff as well. You've got to be in the system to take advantage of the system with aged care. So you've got to get an ACAT assessment before you need it, is the reality.
Actuaries need to have a campaign out there.
Yeah, they
marketing
do.
campaign. Like,
So,
Actuaries, how to sort your life
so
in
I said
one easy risk.
before that in 20 years' time, 60% of people will have more than $500,000 in super.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say $500,000. Divide that by 20. That's $25,000 a year.
Yep.
It'll roughly fund for the rest of your life. Plus the age pension. You won't get the full age pension, but between the two of those things, for most of your life, you'll now have a $50,000 a year income.
Pretty good.
Some from the age pension, some from your own money. Not 25. You can double that with the age pension. That
Yep.
changes your life.
It's absolutely life-changing. The other thing I wanted to get in before we wrap is the world-changing view that you do go into retirement with a mortgage, a $1 mortgage maybe. But tell us about this, Andrew.
So we've talked. I wrote an article last year on more than just a roof.
Yep.
So the role of the home
Housing.
and getting a reverse mortgage later in life
Very
to help
common.
fund some things.
There's a housing equity access scheme run by the government as well,
Yep.
so which is a more affordable way to get a reverse
Absolutely.
mortgage.
It's limited to 150% of the age pension.
Right.
So if you want more than that, then you need to go into the private market, and there's many providers out there now for that. But there's a lot of discussion going on now about how bad it is and how negative it is to go into retirement with a mortgage. Well, but then we're promoting having a reverse
mortgage later
in
down the
life.
track.
I mean, hello.
Yeah, it makes no
What
sense.
do you want? So if you can have a mortgage going into retirement, and let's say the interest rate for that right now might be 5.5% to 6%, reverse mortgages are more like 8%.
Correct.
Mhm.
And you can pay it down as long as you've got a redraw facility and some of those extra features, you can draw it down to $1.
Which you'll pay a monthly fee on, right? So you might pay your $4, $6 a month to keep a mortgage, but you might only have $1 on your mortgage, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
And then
If something happens, so if the share market tanks and you don't want to draw money out of your super, you let it recover.
because that's a money risk.
Use your
which-
redraw facility, and that will be you charge interest maybe at 5.5%, but your superannuation over the longer term should be earning 7%.
So you get that
Now, there's a
differential.
timing issue, and then leverage can be dangerous, but I don't think having some access to capital through a mortgage at the start of retirement is such a bad thing. You need to have advice,
Yep.
obviously,
And you need to understand
what you're getting into.
all the things to think about.
But it's just flexibility.
Mm.
Why would you deny
And
that
it's-
extra flexibility for
it's
some part of
pretty-
your life?
It's pretty incredible what you can do with just $1 in a mortgage. You can actually hedge against the money market risk and potentially even the longevity and health span stuff. So when you're trying to make that decision, instead of going to a RAD, you could actually fund it out of a mortgage redraw facility, right? To
Yes.
do the cheaper option that you were talking about in the podcast.
Yeah.
No, I like the sound of that. The only thing I worry about is, again, people not, I'm sorry to keep going back to it, but people not right-sizing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
people, it almost encourages people to stay in their
Big
huge
house.
nest egg.
Yeah.
Why would I sell my rambling Edwardian house when, if I think it's actually a great
Yeah.
idea, but I just think
I know.
if we promote it if we see it's playing
socialist
out.
in you,
I
Alice.
know, it's
love
quite
that about you.
ingrained.
And
Well,
we've talked
too
about
many
this
years in
off air
Paris.
before
Yeah.
as well. It's just that as soon as something is a good idea,
Yeah.
then watch the scammers come
Yeah.
around.
Yeah,
We did talk about that. And they will come. And the scammers could be the people that you're paying to care for you in your house, who you're also giving your ATM card to buy your groceries because you can no longer go to the supermarket on your own, right? So there's many risks. The world is full of them. The joy is where it becomes well worth it. And it's been really joyous talking to you. So thank you so much for coming on. Like, subscribe and follow The Midlife Shift. The bell should be down below. Thank you, Alice Stoltz from Domain and Andrew Boll, superannuation guru, Deloitte guru, ASFA guru, all the guru-ness of superannuation risk. Thank you all.